In other words, you're quite sure that every general who serves should not go directly into the defense industry for 10 years. But you're not willing to make that same pledge?
I'm not a general, Senator.
You'll be the one.
That we're the enemy. Are you saying that 50% of the DOD, if they hold liberal views or leftist views or are Democrats, are not welcome in the military? Are you saying that?
Senator, I volunteered to deploy to Afghanistan under Democrat President Barack Obama. I also volunteered to guard the inauguration of Joe Biden, but was denied the opportunity to serve because I was identified as an extremist by my own unit for a Christian tattoo. And you start to realize that a lot of people you're serving with share your political ideals or they don't. You find out there's Republicans, there's Democrats, there's libertarians, there's independents, there's vegetarians, everything in between. None of that matters. It never mattered in how I led men and women, how I interacted with them, what missions we undertook. Politics has nothing to do with the battlefield.
Pete Hegseth, the nominee for the Secretary of Defense, had his confirmation hearing in the Senate, and here are the best moments from that 4-hour confirmation hearing. Hope you guys enjoy it and that it saves you a lot of time to know what's going on. It's SeanDaniel here. If you enjoy the video, consider subscribing or supporting me with a YouTube membership. Let's start it off with this exact clip where Pete Hegseth explains why he accepted Donald Trump's nomination to be Secretary of Defense.
Why do you want to do this job? What drives you? Why do you want to do this job? What drives you?
You have 30 seconds.
Because I love my country, Senator, and I've dedicated my life to the warfighters. People see me as someone who hosts a morning show on television. But people that really know me know where my heart's at. It's with the guys in this audience who've had my back, and I've had theirs. We've been in some of the darkest and most difficult places you can ever be in. You come back a different person. And only by the grace of God am I here before you today. I'm doing this job for them, for all of them.
So let that set the stage for his mentality behind all the things he's going to deal with in this video. All the different attacks, and that starts with not the senators, not the politicians, but the protesters trying to throw him off.
And readiness.
All these people freaking out because he doesn't want DEI in the military and he wants to take a stand.
You may continue, sir.
Returning the Pentagon back to warfighting, that's it. That's my job.
Mr. Hegseth, suspend your remarks. Let me just say this. The Capitol Police are going to remove immediately individuals that are disrupting the hearing. I see a pattern attempted to be inflicted on the committee, and we're simply not going to tolerate that. You may proceed.
To bring back warfighting, if confirmed, I'm going to work with President Trump and this committee to, one, restore the warrior ethos to the Pentagon and throughout our fighting force. In doing so, we will reestablish trust in our military, addressing the recruiting crisis, the retention crisis, and readiness crisis in our ranks.
Another one.
Members of the security force will remove.
They just got that guy out of there real quick. You can't tell me these people are not coordinated to be there or paid, that they're just random people. No, they want to throw him off emotionally and mentally to make a big mistake. Now let's get to the heavy hitters, the senators that have had their teams preparing them and possibly taking orders from up above, how to take down Pete Hegseth, got to work on that, how to embarrass him, how to showcase that he's not fit for this position because they don't want him to go and take a stand and transform the Department of Defense.
I don't want you thinking, can't serve if you're a mom, can't serve if you're LGBTQ, and then last, can't serve if you're a leftist. The statements you said about people who have views differently than you, that we're the enemy. Are you saying the 50% of the DOD, if they hold liberal views or leftist views or are Democrats, are not welcome in the military? Are you saying that?
Senator, I volunteered to deploy to Afghanistan under Democrat President Barack Obama. I also volunteered to guard the inauguration of Joe Biden, but was denied the opportunity to serve because I was identified as an extremist by my own unit for a Christian tattoo.
I don't want you thinking,
Boom.
can't serve it.
Because you see the greater impact. Instead of him just saying, no, I appreciate other people, I want to serve with them, boom, he says something else. He is prepared for this. We're just getting started.
Moving on. President-elect has attacked our allies in recent weeks, refusing to rule out using military force to take over Greenland and the Panama Canal, and threatening to make Canada the 51st state. Would you carry out an order from President Trump to seize Greenland, a territory of our NATO ally Denmark, by force, or would you comply with an order to take over the Panama Canal?
Senator, I will emphasize that President Trump received 77 million votes to be the lawful
We're
commander-in-chief
not
of
talking
this
about
country.
the election. My question is, would you use our military to take over Greenland or an ally of Denmark?
Senator, one of the things that President Trump is so good at is never strategically tipping his hand. And so I would never in this public forum give one way or another direct what orders the president would give me in any context.
That sounds to me that you would contemplate carrying out such an order to basically invade Greenland.
See, he handled that really well. The logic, why would he explain a true plan that Trump has to maybe grow this country? Maybe he's just bluffing.
I have failed in things in my life, and thankfully I'm redeemed by my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ.
In finalizing divorces from your first and second wives, were there non-disclosure agreements in connection with those divorces?
Senator, not that I'm aware of.
If there were, would you agree to release those first and second wives from any confidentiality agreement?
Senator, it's not something I'm aware of.
But if there were, you would agree to release them from a confidentiality agreement?
Senator, that's not my responsibility.
Did you ever engage in any acts of physical violence against any of your wives?
Senator, absolutely not.
But you would agree with me that if someone had committed physical violence against a spouse, that would be disqualifying to serve as Secretary of Defense, correct?
Senator, absolutely not have I ever done that.
You would agree that that would be a disqualifying offense, would you not?
Senator, you're talking about a hypothetical.
I don't think it's a hypothetical. Violence against spouses occurs every day. And if you as a leader are not capable of saying that physical violence against a spouse should be a disqualifying fact for being secretary of the most powerful nation in the world, you're demonstrating an astonishing lack of judgment. The incident in Monterey led to a criminal charge, a criminal investigation, a private settlement, and a cash payment to the woman who filed the complaint. And there was also a non-disclosure agreement, correct?
It was a confidential settlement agreement off of a nuisance lawsuit.
Right. During an interview, you claimed that you settled the matter because you were worried that if it became public, it might hurt your career. Do you maintain that you were blackmailed?
Senator, I maintain that false claims were made against me. And ultimately,
Your attorney
those
used
false
the
claims,
frame,
I have the opportunity to attest my innocence in those false claims.
They're going to keep coming at him with these heavy, heavy things about his past, just like they did with, what was his name? Kavanaugh, Justice Kavanaugh. They're going to try to bring up any single dirt to show why he's not fit, despite the logic with which he presents his case and his possible strategies he wants to implement. And one of the main gotcha moments that we have in this hearing is from Senator Warren, but it backfires on her real quick. And watch this guy's reaction to it.
In other words, you're quite sure that every general who serves should not go directly into the defense industry for 10 years. But you're not willing to make that same pledge?
I'm not a general, Senator.
You'll be the one, let us just be clear, in charge of the generals. In other words,
Watch his reaction. Watch his reaction.
I'm not a general, Senator.
you'll be the one.
That did not work out too well.
I'm just about trying to get things done, managing efficiently, and having the best people who have demonstrated that in a large organization. And I'm sorry, but I don't see that in your background. There are a lot of other things you can do very well. You're a capable person, but you have not convinced me that you're able to take on this tremendous responsibility with a complex organization and having little or no significant management experience.
Senator, I'm grateful to be hired by one of the most successful CEOs in American history, should I be confirmed.
Mr. Hegseth, it seems to me that you've supervised far more people than the average United States senator supervises today.
So true, so true, so true. But yet you have senators in this hearing trying to criticize him, saying you have not supervised enough people. How many people has this senator supervised? First of all, watch when he's talking. We're going to put it on mute really quickly. His hands are shaking. He doesn't strike me as a confident public speaker in such an important forum like this if he seems to me like his hands are shaking. What is he going to tell Pete Hegseth about managing? Now, before we get to some more frustrating and attacking moments, let's see how Pete Hegseth handles sharing his military expertise, his knowledge of weapons and other things in the military, which could give him greater authority in the people who he's going to oversee, that he has actually been in the battlefield, experienced these things, and he's not just some higher-up politician who's going to be giving orders.
What do you think are most important strategic bases in the Pacific?
In the Pacific, Guam is pretty strategically significant.
How many rounds of 5.56 can you fit into the magazine of an M4 rifle?
Depends on the magazine, but standard issue is 30, Senator.
And what size round does the M9 Beretta standard issue sidearm for the military fire?
A 9mm, Senator.
What kind of batteries do you put in your night vision goggle?
Duracell.
So right there, you're representing qualifications that show you understand what the warfighter deals with every single day on the battlefield. You understand what happens on the front line, where our troops will be. And what happens, unfortunately, in this country is decisions made in rooms like this, bad decisions, end up in dead 17, 18, 19-year-old Americans. And those Americans rarely come from families that sit in rooms like this. They come from lower middle-income families who sometimes the military is their only way out. And they join because maybe they want to go to college. Maybe they had no other choice. Maybe they love this country. But for whatever reason, they joined and they side on the dotted line. And when people like us screw up, they don't come home. And that's the one thing that I care about. As you remember when I shut the door, when you came with your entourage, Senator Coleman, I've known for a long time, and you and I sat together, asked you one question. You remember what that question was?
Are you going to have the backs of the warfighters?
Exactly. What is going to be your number one priority? And I don't care, frankly, what all these letters and articles say. I've been a part of a smear campaign too, I get it. I care that you're going to have one thing in mind when you sit in that chair in that 5-sided building. And you told me what that was. So with that, you have my support. I'm sorry you have to go through a process like this, but it is one of the most important jobs in the world. We got to make sure you're ready for it. I thank you for your answers.
Because this guy, Tim Sheehy, is a former Navy SEAL. And just the little information that Pete Hegseth shared, yes, it doesn't show that he's, this amazing military mind. Excuse me for the loud noise in the street. It doesn't show that he's this amazing military mind, but it does show these little nuances that he probably knows, that probably nobody else in that Senate room knows. Now, as the head of the Department of Defense, and the Department of Defense was responsible for getting rid of people who were in the military because they would not get the vaccine. What is Pete Hegseth going to do about all these people that got screwed over?
So we got a recruiting crisis. 8,000 well-trained. So we got a recruiting crisis. 8,000 well-trained men and women were fired. Will you commit today, Mr. Hegseth, to recruit these folks back, to give them back pay, and give them an apology from the United States government for how they were disrespected?
Senator, I will commit to this because the Commander-in-Chief has committed to this, that not only will they be reinstated, they will receive an apology, back pay, and rank that they lost because they were forced out due to an experimental vaccine.
Thank you. So we got a recruiting crisis.
Notice how he keeps referring back to what the commander-in-chief has instituted. And I work for the commander-in-chief. He put me in the position. He's the one who makes the big decisions. I make these other decisions in my department, but he keeps setting this precedent, and he did it multiple times throughout the hearing, which makes sense, it's logical, and based on the precedents, it's correct. But what about the military-industrial complex that continually influences politicians and leaders to not make decisions for the betterment of the country, for the safety of our citizens, even for the safety of our military members, but instead causes them to make decisions that build up the pockets and finances of these military-industrial companies and themselves? How's Hegseth going to handle that?
I feel, frankly, a little bit liberated. Is that I didn't work at Lockheed or any number of, pick a defense contractor. I didn't mean to point one out in particular. Pick any. I haven't. I don't have a special interest in any particular system or any particular company or any particular narrative. I want to know what works. I want to know what defeats our enemies, what keeps us safe, what deters them, what keeps our enemies up at night. Whatever that is, I want more of it, and I want to invest in it. And I know that's the view that President Trump has as well.
Makes sense. He's never worked for these defense companies like many other people have. Nikki Haley.
That the way we fought our wars back when the Geneva Conventions were written are a lot different than the asymmetric, non-conventional environment of counterinsurgency that I confronted in Iraq and Afghanistan. I was the senior counterinsurgency instructor in Afghanistan. My job was to understand how the Taliban and Al-Qaeda operated so that NATO units coming in could be informed of what was happening. They knew our rules of engagement, and when they were more restrictive, they took advantage of them, and it put our men and women in a more dangerous and difficult place.
And you believe
For future wars we fight, we need to have someone atop the Pentagon, sir, who understands how those ripple effects
Well, I just want
impact
to
the men and women
understand
in
your
uniform.
position. Your position is torture's okay. Is that correct? Waterboarding, torture is.
What does that have to do with the question he was answering, the answer he was just giving about the impact of decisions impacting soldiers on the front line? See, that's why he has the smirk. Watch.
I just
The
want to
men and women
understand
in
your
uniform.
position. Your position is torture's okay. Is that correct?
He's like, where
Waterboarding,
did this come
torture
from?
is no longer prohibited given the circumstances of whatever war we're in. Is that correct?
Senator, that is not what I said. I've never been party to torture. We are a country that fights by the rule of law, and our men and women always do. And yet we have too many people here in air-conditioned offices that like to point fingers at the guys in dark and dangerous places, the gals in helicopters in enemy territory who are doing
true.
things that people in Washington, D.C. would never dare to do, or send, in many cases.
In one of your interviews, you said they're willing to do this. You're talking about Donald Trump and Senator Cruz. They're willing to do something like waterboarding if it's going to keep us safe. Are you okay with waterboarding?
Senator, the law of the land is that waterboarding is not legal.
So the statement that you made, you now recant. Is that correct? They are willing to do something like waterboarding if it's going to keep us safe. You expressed that with approval.
Senator, I'm very familiar with that as a concept, having spent a year at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, guarding 700 of those that attacked us on 9/11.
I just want to be clear. Are we going to abide by the Geneva Convention and the prohibitions on torture, or are we not? Is it going to
Senator,
depend
as
on
I've
the circumstances?
As I've stated multiple times, the Geneva Conventions are what we base ours, but what an American first national security policy is not going to do is hand its prerogatives over to international bodies that make decisions about how our men and women make decisions on the battlefield. America First understands we send Americans for a clear mission and a clear objective. We equip them properly for that objective.
All right,
We give
I
them
have
everything they
I have a very
need,
few
and then we stand behind them.
See, it sounds like he's referencing we shouldn't have this international body ruling how we protect our country like the Geneva Convention. That's what it sounded like to me right there.
Are we going to abide by the Geneva Convention and the prohibitions on torture, or are we not? Is it going to
Senator,
depend
as
on
I've-
the circumstances?
As I've stated multiple times, the Geneva Conventions are what we base ours, but what an American first national security policy is not going to do is hand its prerogatives over to international bodies that make decisions about how our men and women make decisions on the battlefield.
And that makes sense. He might be saying, hey, because I'm sure we know that torture and stuff like that happens in other countries. Come on. Like it doesn't happen. Maybe they always follow the Geneva Convention. Who knows? But that was a pretty good answer. Because they just want you to give the political answer. Oh, no, we're not going to do waterboarding. We're not going to do torture. We're not going to do any of that stuff. Because we want to properly take care of these terrorists that we find, potential terrorists, not do anything bad, because it makes sense. There was some bad stuff that went on in Guantanamo Bay.
As far as politics, Senator, it has been the joy of my life to lead men and women in military outfits. When you're in combat or in training, there's a lot of conversations that happen. And you start to realize that a lot of people you're serving with share your political ideals or they don't. You find out there's Republicans, there's Democrats, there's Libertarians, there's Independents, there's Vegetarians, everything in between. None of that matters. It never mattered in how I led men and women, how I interacted with them, what missions we undertook. Politics has nothing to do with the battlefield, which is why President Trump has asked me to say, let's make sure all of that comes out. This is about warfighting capability, setting standards high, and making sure we give our boys, our men and women, everything they need to be successful on the battlefield. So politics can play no part in that, and I look forward to infusing that, as we always have inside our units.
Good answer, good answer. Now a few more clips, and with this one we're going to hear how Pete Hegseth explains the media attack that was initiated and was engaged against him as a result of this nomination, and how eye-opening it was for him.
What became very evident to us from the beginning, there was a coordinated smear campaign orchestrated in the media against us. That was clear from moment one. And what we knew is that it wasn't about me. Most of it was about President Donald Trump, who's had to endure the very same thing for much longer amounts of time. And he endured it in incredibly strong ways. So we, in some ways, knew it was coming. We didn't understand the depth of the dishonesty that would come with it. So from story after story in the media, left-wing media, we saw anonymous source after anonymous source based on second or third-hand accounts. And time again, stories would come out, and people would reach out to me and say, you know, I've spoken to this reporter about who you really are, and I was willing to go on the record. But they didn't print my quote. They didn't print any of my quotes. Or, I've worked with you for 10 years, or I was your accountant, or I was your chief operating officer, or I was your board member, or I was with you on 100 different tour stops for Concerned Veterans for America. No one called me. No one asked about your conduct on the record or off the record. Instead, a small handful of anonymous sources were allowed to drive a smear campaign, an agenda about me, because our left-wing media in America today, sadly, doesn't care about the truth.
It's true. It's true, and it shows you why independent media, social media, is gaining more and more trust and giving more and more power. Because if you want to put out a story about Pete Hegseth, that you worked with him and you have a Twitter following or Instagram following, you can do it. You don't need the media to print your quote about him. And now we're going to end it with a 4.5-minute explanation monologue from Pete Hegseth to really explain his mindset, who he is, why he's doing this. Hope it gives you guys a greater insight into him. Let's go.
The Department of Defense under Donald Trump will achieve peace through strength. And in pursuing these America First national security goals, will remain patriotically apolitical and stridently constitutional. Unlike the current administration, politics should play no part in military matters. We are not Republicans. We are not Democrats. We are American warriors. Our standards will be high, and they will be equal, not equitable. That's a very different word. We need to make sure every warrior is fully qualified on their assigned weapons system, every pilot's fully qualified and current on the aircraft they are flying, and every general or flag officer is selected for leadership or promotion purely based on performance, readiness, and merit. Leaders at all levels will be held accountable, and warfighting and lethality and the readiness of the troops and their families will be our only focus. This has been my focus ever since I first put on the uniform as a young Army ROTC cadet at Princeton University in 2001. I joined the military because I love my country and felt an obligation to defend it. I served with incredible Americans in Guantanamo Bay, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and on the streets of Washington, D.C., many of which are with me here today. This includes enlisted soldiers I helped become American citizens, and Muslim allies I helped immigrate from Iraq and Afghanistan. Because when I took off the uniform, my mission never stopped. Now, it is true and has been acknowledged that I don't have a similar biography to defense secretaries of the last 30 years. But as President Trump also told me, we've repeatedly placed people atop the Pentagon with supposedly the right credentials, whether they are retired generals, academics, or defense contractor executives. And where has it gotten us? He believes, and I humbly agree, that it's time to give someone with dust on his boots the helm. A change agent, someone with no vested interest in certain companies or specific programs or approved narratives. My only special interest is the warfighter. Deterring wars, and if called upon, winning wars by ensuring our warriors never enter a fair fight. We let them win, and we bring them home. Like many of my generation, I've been there. I've led troops in combat. I've been on patrol for days. I've pulled the trigger down range, heard bullets whiz by, flex-cuffed insurgents, called in close air support, led medevacs, dodged IEDs, pulled out dead bodies.
Wow.
And knelt before a battlefield cross. This is not academic for me. This is my life. I led then, and I will lead now. Ask anyone who's ever worked for me or with me. I know what I don't know. My success as a leader, and I very much look forward to discussing my organization's successes at Vets for Freedom and Concerned Veterans for America. I'm incredibly proud of the work that we've done. But my success as a leader has always been setting a clear vision, hiring people smarter and more capable than me, empowering them to succeed, holding everyone accountable, and driving toward clear metrics. Build the plan, work the plan, and then work harder than everyone else around you. I've sworn an oath to the Constitution before, and if confirmed, I will proudly do it again. This time, for the most important deployment of my life.
Yeah.
I pledge to be a faithful partner to this committee, taking input and respecting oversight. We share the same goals: a ready, lethal military, the health and well-being of our troops, and a strong and secure America. Thank you for the time, and I look forward to your questions.
Wow. Hope you guys enjoyed getting a great insight into Pete Hegseth, how he did in this interview, in this Senate confirmation hearing. It's Sean Daniel. If you enjoy the videos, consider subscribing or watching another one right here, and I will see you in the next one.